Okay, before this starts, there's a few things that I want to preface before we get into the conversation, which is that one, there is going to be background noise, and it is from my end. I couldn't really do anything about that. And two, there was connection issues on Ona's end, which also she couldn't really do anything about, although she did try. So I'm going to try edit it the best I can so it's listenable. Most of it isn't laggy. It's only some parts that are laggy, but I'll try and salvage those the best I can. Anyway, enjoy. So I am here with, is it Ona? Is that how you say it?
Ona, yeah.
Okay, we're here with Ona. Ona Jordyn. She is a trans YouTuber who makes political videos, kind of. I mean, she covers political stuff. I do have a question here that's just, like, intro yourself, like, just who are you? Why did you make your channel? What are your goals with it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I am super excited to be here. Yeah, my name is Ona Jordyn. I'm 23. I live on the West Coast here in the United States. Like you said, I really started my channel because I wouldn't say there's a shortage of trans people online, like with more realistic views about the topic, but they are a smaller group, and I wanted to just add to that conversation. So yes, I would say that my videos range from like medical and like scientific information to like socio-political. So you're right.
Okay. Um, is there anything that you'd want people to know before we get into, like, the meat of the video?
Um, you know, Off the top of my head, I guess that uh, everyone's experience is different. And while yes, I do subscribe to my own beliefs, I always try to keep an open mind um, when it comes to anything coming from the political right or the political left. I definitely identify as like a centrist, potentially center right, but even then, I would I think a more accurate description would just be like an old school liberal, like the
Yeah.
old meaning of liberal, rather than the updated meaning of liberal. So
Okay.
that, yeah. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Just to, like, clarify for anyone watching, we literally just got in the call and we're already recording, so that we haven't talked to each other before, really, besides Instagram DMs. So this the conversation might seem awkward for the first 10 minutes, but we should get into the swing of it. Right. So, how do you personally view gender and sex? Like, because obviously they're different things. So, how do you view them? Because they are connected, seemingly, but they're not the same.
Well, they're way more than connected. They're very much intertwined in more ways than one. They are different uh, in terms of like a dictionary definition. And like you mentioned in your video on gender dysphoria, um, that definition has actually been held, like the definition that defines them as different has been held for quite a lot longer than like the kind of gender ideology movement has been around. So I do respect the difference between them, but um, I do see them as very much like kind of enmeshed. Not only that, but my personal views on gender are that there's definitely a sexually dimorphic binary on average. This is not to say that intersex people do not exist. And to be quite honest with you, it's not to say that non binary people don't exist. It's just that we cannot ignore the fact that when you leave the house and you go to the grocery store or the gas station or school or, anywhere really, even within your home, there is a sexually dimorphic division between men and women. And to me, this doesn't discredit trans people. Um, I think that, I'm sure at some point we'll discuss gender dysphoria and talk
Yeah.
more about like trans people specifically rather than just like gender and sex. But yeah, I personally don't think that viewing sex as something biological necessarily like discredits the existence of transgender people or non-trans people.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. So that you actually brought up a point which I have written down here is like, so you mentioned non-binary identities. What are your thoughts on those? Because they are an interesting point of conversation. I don't personally have much of a view on it.
So um, with uh, non-binary identities, you know, it's a nuanced topic, I think is the best way to kind of enter that one. First and foremost, I think that there's a big difference between someone who genuinely identifies as like neither or kind of both. Because if we're acknowledging the fact that someone with gender dysphoria can have an extremely difficult to impossible time feeling a connection to their birth body, I think that it's only reasonable to assume that there are definitely people out there who have a difficult to nearly impossible time connecting to either, right?
Yeah.
So, from a biological perspective, it honestly does make sense. I think that some of the logic falls apart when we get into things like neopronouns, like, let's say like vampire gender, or,
Yeah.
using pronouns like blood/blood self and things like that. I personally will not refer to someone as like it. Um, I will just avoid pronouncing them, period. Um, there's also something to be said for um, the non binary community, which, like I said, I in many ways see as like valid, kind of like placing themselves underneath the transgender term. I think that that's just a little bit disrespectful, primarily because we have people like there's a celebrity named Ezra Miller who identifies as non binary, and he recently got arrested for assaulting a woman. Um, and in his arrest, like police cam video, he's being searched by the police, like his pockets and such. And he's just like yelling out in like the manliest voice you've ever heard. He's like, I'm transgender non binary and I don't want to be searched by a man. I'm transgender non binary and I don't want to be searched by a man. And that kind of stuff just gets me thinking like, girl, you and you and I don't have anything in common. Like nothing. Um,
Yeah.
there are experiences like I've always kind of said on this topic, like if there's another trans girl in a room, right, and I'm at like a party or some kind of gathering, even if her and I have different political views, religious views, different ways of dressing, even if we're from different races or cultural backgrounds, I know for a fact that we have so many shared experiences that if things go sideways, I can walk up to her and be like, "Girl, we got to get out of here. Like,
Yeah.
let's go." And she's going to immediately trust me right off the bat because of that. Um, but if Ezra Miller or some other like biologically male or biologically female non-binary person who has virtually no similar experiences to me or other trans people came up to me at a party and was like, "Girl, we got to get out of here. Like, let's go." I'd be like, "Who are you? Like, what?" You know?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I don't want to go on too long about it unless you have more questions, but that's kind of uh, a difficult topic to get into without offending some people, but also like affirming the wrong people. Because I'm
Yeah.
definitely not like an avid like Matt Walsh supporter, although he has like some points. I don't like kind of further affirming his crowd too
Yeah.
much, at least. So yeah.
I started watching some Matt Walsh recently just to see what he was about. That was a rabbit hole. That's what I'll say. I watched half of his documentary. It was something. So you mentioned that they shouldn't be non-binary people shouldn't put themselves under the transgender umbrella. What do you think defines, in your opinion, someone to be transgender? Because it could be argued by some people that non-binary identities are technically transgender as they transition in some sense away from their birth assigned gender.
Well, before I answer that question, I have to obviously address like their arguments for being included in the trans umbrella, like you said. So the first thing they would say is that the definition of transgender is identifying as something other than your birth sex. Um,
Mm.
and so they would use this saying that being non-binary is different from just being biologically male or female, and so therefore they are transgender. And side note, even within that logic, I've heard people say that if you are intersex and non-binary, then that means that you're basically cisgender
What?
because you are neither perfectly male nor female biologically, and you also happen to not identify as male or female on a gender identity level, which would make you non-trans. And if you are intersex and identify with one or the other, then apparently that would make you trans. According to these people, I just think that's a very interesting like thing of them to say. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing that they would say is that a social transition is a transition in and of itself. And they would also say that it is disrespectful to not include trans people who cannot, for whatever reason, whether it be medical, familial, legal, medically transition from the community, um, because it is like invalidating their diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So there's a few problems with each of those things. I get that they are well intentioned and I see where they're coming from. But here's the thing, and I'll touch on each one by one. So, um, with the idea that it is disrespectful to exclude people who cannot medically transition, I think that it's actually more disrespectful that they would bring those people into their conversation because there is a massive difference between someone who is empirically diagnosed with gender dysphoria and has been struggling to stay alive, essentially, day by day, and feels that they live in an alien body and would do anything to transition, but maybe they are not a good candidate for it because of things like blood pressure levels or family medical history, or maybe they live in a country where it's illegal or extremely difficult to acquire, um, or maybe they just genuinely cannot face the ramifications of it on like a family or social level. Those people are going through a hell that is beyond anything a biologically male he slash they slash it could ever comprehend.
Yeah.
So I see where they're coming from, but my counterpoint is that I would never exclude a trans person who is having a medical transition gate kept. Um, but I would absolutely exclude someone who has vocally and confidently addressed the fact that they have no problem with their biological body and are not interested in pursuing that transition at all. I think those are two different experiences. The second thing would be the idea that the definition of transgender is identifying as anything other than your birth sex. Um, since these people love to update terms on a daily basis, I will play their same game with them and say that we definitely need an update into the definition of transgender, of transsexual. One that classifies it specifically with a set of experiences and diagnoses that we all tend to share, that they do not. And I do not think doing so is disrespectful to them. In fact, I think it would actually help the non-binary community to differentiate themselves and, for lack of a better term, just fight their own battle rather than coattail.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion. So that's how I see it.
So would you say it requires dysphoria to... I didn't pick this up, this is just a question that I have, and it relates. Would you say it requires someone to have dysphoria to be trans?
Absolutely.
What, do you have any reason for that you'd like to explain?
Again, because of shared experiences, I think that there are just certain things that every single like I said, like if if I identify another trans person in a room, regardless of all of our superficial differences, there are certain things that we just mutually understand by default.
Yeah.
That provide us a camaraderie.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily mean that I don't get along with other people. In fact, I don't have any transgender friends that are very close to me. Almost everyone I know is non-trans. So I'm not saying that, like, you know, my besties in the world are by default people who live the same life as me. I'm just saying that gender dysphoria and its side effects and outcomes provide a set of experiences that are universal for us. So
Yeah.
I would absolutely say that it needs a diagnosis of dysphoria.
So going back to to Matt Walsh.
Oh God.
What is a woman? Can you tell me?
I'm not even going to tell you. You know exactly what a woman is. Like everyone, I refuse to entertain this question because we all know what it is. There is a reason that trans women appear the way that we do, make the modifications that we make, go about life in the way that we do, update our wardrobes in the way that we do. A woman is an extremely identifiable symbol and way of living and set of characteristics. So, you know, I get where that point is coming from, but the only reason that we have to ask is because the non-binary community latching itself onto the trans community has kind of rearranged the meaning of these things, but the inherent meaning is still there. You know what a woman is. I know what a woman is. You know what a man is. To entertain it is honestly, to me, like feeding a fire that I have no interest in feeding.
Yeah. Okay, so...
But it's a good question. I'm not degrading a question, sorry.
It wasn't my question, don't apologise. This was Matt Walsh's question. I'm
Yeah.
passing on a note. So going back to before you transitioned, if you could have taken a pill that would have gotten rid of the dysphoria, made you entirely comfortable as your birth sex, would you have taken that pill or would you have still transitioned, and why?
That is... Oh, man. That's a really good question. You know, I've been thinking about that a lot. It's crossed my mind quite a few times, and I don't have an answer yet. I think I would.
Question.
I think I would. Yeah. I'm very happy post-transition. I love, like, appearing the way that I do and living the life that I do and mostly feeling the way that I feel. Like, I made a video recently about biochemical dysphoria, and like estrogen literally makes my brain function more properly, and so I do enjoy the process of transition on multiple, like, psychological, spiritual, and physical levels. So knowing what I know now, maybe not, but back then, yeah, probably.
So, in your video called Biochemical Dysphoria, you mentioned how if men have low test and high estrogen, they suffer mentally. However, if a trans woman takes estrogen and blocks the testosterone, it has the opposite effect. Is this something that's been studied, or is this a personal observation?
Um, so both. Uh, it is a personal observation. I think it has definitely been empirically observed over a long period of time that biological males benefit from having high testosterone. Um, I think that it has definitely been studied that trans women benefit from high levels of estrogen. Uh, but some of those studies can be a little bit politically informed. So I'll just speak from my own experience. When I have high testosterone, if I'm being completely blunt, like I am the worst person in the world. I hate this. I lose appetite. I want to, in my own life, it's just
Mm.
horrible. And then estrogen enters my system, so I have a higher sex drive, just like more optimistic, and overall, I'm just living a much better life. I would never, it kind of ties into the question that you asked before, like if I could take that pill and make the gender dysphoria disappear. Um, yes, if I hadn't transitioned yet, I would. But like I said, knowing what I know now and how positive estrogen has been for me, I would never um, allow testosterone to become my dominant sex hormone again. It's a horrible experience for me. But it's the opposite for biological men who are not trans. They just succeed in life so much more if their estrogen levels are low. So it's very interesting. It's kind of anecdotal evidence, but I'm glad you asked the question.
Yeah, that video was really interesting. I remember watching it and you said that, and I found that really, really interesting. Um, okay, so what is your view on the controversy around trans people in sports?
That's a tough one because if someone has been on puberty blockers and there is virtually no difference physically in terms of like bone density, uh, width of like the rib cage and shoulders and um, skull size and all of those things that can kind of vary, um, then I guess it's just not really a problem. But in terms of like the Leah Thomas situation, which I think has really set up the debate, although it's been had before, I think that her participation in women's sports has really exacerbated the debate. In situations like that, it's like, girl, come on, like use your eyes,
Yeah.
like this is clearly inappropriate. Um, so I see two different solutions. In the same way that wrestling has a weight class, right? And you kind of compete with people who, you do not have a necessarily like anatomical advantage over, and so like may the best fighter win, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the way that I think wrestling works. We could do something like that. It would honestly not be very difficult because I'm 5'9". I weigh 148 pounds. Uh, there are biological women who are bigger and stronger than me. Um, if I was 6'2", it would be more rare, but the situation would be the same. There would still be biological women who are, my same size or whatever. So, we could implement something like that, and we could alleviate this issue. Of course, there's still things to consider like lung capacity, red blood cell count, etc. But while I do disagree with people like Leah Thomas, competing with all of these like 5'1", young women,
Yeah.
uh, at the same time, when you look deeper into a lot of these like trans women competing in women's sports stories, especially the ones who have like transitioned for a very long time, they lose as well to biological women. It happens. So I have a pretty centered view on it. The second solution I see is just creating like a league for transgender people. And so I think there's ways to fix it, but I don't know if anyone is ready to take on either of those solutions. Of course, like the simple solution that, the far right would introduce is like make trans women compete with men. But anyone with a brain who knows anything about like real trans women can clearly see why that is, non-logical. So, you have to look at it from multiple different perspectives if you want to find like a real solution to the problem.
Yeah.
What do you think of it?
See, I get that from the trans athlete's perspective. Is like they like sports is their life, most likely. They want to compete in sports because that's what they love to do, and so I completely empathize with the fact that they really want to compete in sports. However, if it's when there is such a disadvantage in play, I feel like unless there has been something done to balance the scales a bit, then it kind of lacks athletic integrity to go ahead and compete against people you have a clear advantage over. And
Absolutely.
it's a really difficult topic because I don't know physical bodies to a degree that I could accurately make a system that would balance it all out. So, and neither do you, I assume. So our views on this are really limited in a sense, but with things like the Leah Thompson, I think that's her name, if I remember correctly, situation,
mm-hmm.
it's in my opinion, it's a clear that should not be allowed in that instance.
It's common sense.
Yeah, and the fact people try and defend it amazes me. It
Me too.
blows my mind.
Me too. Yeah, no, I sometimes I feel like we live in like a little clown world, like a happy little like
Yeah.
clown world, but it's like but like underneath all the like rainbows and like freshly picked daisies and things like that, it's like underneath it all it's like grim
Yeah, just a bunch
and
of
like,
shit being ignored. Just
destitute.
To keep,
Yeah.
just to keep this look.
Yeah, totally. Well, on that topic, what do you think of um trans women in what do you think of like the trans people in prison debate?
That's a really good. I haven't thought about this too much because this is the thing. If a guy wants to just if a guy can just identify as a woman and that's all the state needs to then have to put him in a female prison, then every guy that is somewhat comfortable in his masculinity and
A rapist.
or a rapist, yeah, I mean there is the whole situation of that too, but also any guy who just wants to get an easier sentencing, because women's prisons are not as violent as men's, and a man would have a very clear advantage in there physically, and yeah, there'd be the problem of rape and things like that happening. So, as again, maybe a different sector for that. I don't know if that would work, if that would be possible, if there'd be enough inmates, or what. But I think I honestly do not know. They'd have to, if we are going to take it seriously, and not just put any guy that says he's a woman in there, then they'd have. I think a transgender prison would be the right way potentially, but I don't know how that would work with managing that. Like someone's got to run and pay for that.
Yeah, so there's a few is it okay if I respond
Yeah.
as well?
No, you're not allowed to respond.
So
Shut the fuck up.
sorry.
You can respond.
um sorry.
That's
So
fine.
few things like how like kind of blunt can I be with in terms of like language? Like should
Be
I give like
really
a trigger
blunt.
warning or like not swear?
The
Okay.
blunter the better.
So if I was put in a men's prison, I would be raped to death. Point blank period. uh, I would literally be turned sex toy until death. And that's a horrible reality. With trans people, you know, might think a certain thing. Like if they have a soul at all, if they have a heart at all, they would recognize me and people like me as human beings who do not deserve pain. And at the end of the day, if if I was put in a men's prison, that would be my fate. And anyone with a brain can put that together. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, there's
So,
stories of it happening.
absolutely. Um, I mean, imagine it doesn't take a genius. Someone with breast and soft skin and long, soft hair and, a feminine appearance gets put in a men's prison. Like, what do you think is going to happen to them? Right. So, there's a reason that we separate men and women in prison, and it's that reason specifically. And you might not, some people might not believe that I am a woman, and that's up for debate as well. But whatever you want to call me at the end of the day, that would be my fate. And I can very firmly say that I do not deserve that, nor does anyone else in my position, were I or any of us to be thrown in prison for whatever reason. So use your brain first and foremost, not you, but just like like the people engaging in this topic overall.
Yeah.
The second thing is that, and this might be controversial to say, but I really stand on this. Like people know a trans person when they see one. And that's not even like a all trans people are like identifiably trans or like clockable. That's like a you can tell the difference between someone who is trans and someone, again, like Ezra Miller or any of these men who just randomly identify as women, um, the moment that they get like indicted, uh, like you can tell the difference.
Yeah.
Um, Even if she's like really clockable and is like let's say on a journey, like let's say she's like a trans woman who's just like on a journey, right?
Yeah.
You can still tell the difference between her and basically a man. Um, so use common sense as a judge, as a jury, as whoever is making the decision to of how like people be segregated in terms of where they where they go to prison. Use your brain, you know.
Okay, so would you
Um,
say? Oh, sorry, go on.
nope, that was it. Sorry.
Would you say if someone has started or is about to start medical transition, then they should be put into, let's say it's a male to female, into a woman's prison regardless, because they're going to develop those secondary sex characteristics?
Um, there's a few things. So while yes, we could create entirely different prisons altogether for transgender people, I don't think that there's any reason that we can't have just like a different wing of, I mean, if you have like solitary confinement, if you have, the courtyard, different sections of the prison with different guards, or I don't really know. I've never been inside of a prison, so I don't know for
Law
sure, but
citizen.
yeah, like, there's no reason that we can't introduce like a wing for trans people or people who have that biological difference, until they get to a point where they no longer really have that, like these major observable differences in characteristics between themselves and the majority of the inmates. Um, so I don't think it even requires like a major financial outreach of like we have to build new prisons all over the nation specifically for trans people. Um, so it's tough to answer. I'm not saying that someone who hasn't been in prison, uh, but if they are clearly on a journey and they can verify this, I do think that it would be a little bit dangerous for them as an individual to be put in a group. So imagine a group of as far as to fuck each other, you know. I hope that's an okay answer. I haven't really thought about that section of it yet.
Yeah, you like towards the end of it, just like the last like 20-ish seconds of it.
Oh, yeah, I have not thought about that part, you know, too much yet. But you know, if she's clearly on a journey,
Yeah.
you know, and she can verify that, then, you know, I'm not saying that you should or should not put her in a women's prison, but I do still stand on the fact that like if you throw anyone who is feminized in any way, um, even as much as like the length of that person's hair and like the texture of that person's skin, which is are usually the first things that are changed with hormones, not hair length, but you know the texture of your skin.
Yeah.
That person is like automatically identified as like more feminine than the average man, and is put in like grave danger, thrown into a prison environment. So, you know, I
Yeah.
still stand on what I said in reference to myself. Like even if she is early in her transition, maybe not a women's prison, but definitely not a men's prison.
Yeah. Okay. Moving away from
What do
the.
you think?
Oh, okay. What do I think? I honestly don't think that I am informed enough to have an opinion on it. I can't say I've really thought on it before. I've had brief ideas about it, but I don't really. I said everything that I could say on it before you started talking when I was talking about it, and so
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
Do you have a video on that?
I don't have a video on that. I should. That might be a good video
Me too.
to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to, we can get back to them in a second, but just to break the LGBT question streak real quick. So this was actually one from my friend who I showed your videos to. I asked if he had any questions. Okay, so this is what he said. I've noticed in your videos that you seem to be really good at turning the camera on and just talking, keeping a smooth line of dialogue without any cuts. Is this a natural talent, or is it something you have previous experience with? Do you use a script?
Oh my gosh, that's A. Thank you so much to you and your friend. That's really sweet. Um, I think it's kind of like a mix of both. As a kid, I was on TV a few times, like randomly, and I was given a very small amount of time to prepare for each of those experiences. So, um, I kind of got used to that pressure back then. But I do think it's like a natural talent, um, or like skill, I guess. I tend to be like a pretty comfortable person in terms of communication. I've never really been too shy. I am kind of a loner, but I'm not shy, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
uh, and I've always been like a thinker as well, a more like cerebral person. So, yeah, I think it's pretty easy to kind of just sit down and get my thoughts out. And then the second part of the question, I don't use a script, but I sometimes in certain videos have like an outline. Um,
Okay.
and that's usually set up in terms of questions, rather than like point by point. Like I'll write out a question that I would like to answer and then kind of freestyle my answer to that question is how I do it.
Okay, that's good to know. 'Cause, yeah, you do a really good job at just keeping it going. There's not many like ums and likes. Like you just do a good smooth line.
Thank you. You as well. I like your
Okay,
video. I like the communication format of your videos.
thank you. Yeah, I just turn on talk shit, and then if it doesn't sound good, I delete it and redo
Me too.
it. Okay, so this is going really far away from anything we've talked about, and this is more of a
Okay.
question about something I'm personally very involved in. Uh, so what are your views on? So are you aware of the whole like uprising recently of psychedelics.
Oh my gosh, I go on.
Okay. So, what are your views on psychedelics and the war on drugs? That's the question I have written down.
Oh my gosh.
Are you a fan of the psychedelics?
Um, I've done a few.
Are you comfortable talking about it?
Uh, no, you really answer it. I did not. No, I've done shrooms twice, and I've done LSD. I think like 3 times, maybe 4 times. Um, and it's fun. I mean, it's a mixed bag. Uh, I think it's called like ego death or something.
Yeah.
Is like a part of it, and I definitely experienced that once.
It's scary.
Yeah, and I don't think I've been the same ever since. Yeah, it definitely opened my eyes to a lot of things. So, um, it is funny though. The past couple days, I've been researching like medicinal shrooms as an alternative to ADHD medication because I recently decided to stop taking stimulant amphetamines for my ADHD because I was just like, why am I taking meth right now?
Yeah.
Um, this is insane, you know?
I can't believe they give
uh,
kids that.
and so it's fucking insane. I could go on all day about how that's like a crime against humanity. And I think that anyone who decides that meth is a good thing for an 8-year-old should be like shot. Um, but yeah, I stopped taking that and I decided to go on a more holistic route for,
Mm.
my diagnosis. So I've taken up a lot of different just like daily practices to help with that. And in my research, I found medicinal shrooms. I haven't tried them, but I think it's an interesting topic. Apparently, it has great results. So I think that's all I think on it so far in terms of like drugs overall. I mean, like, don't do cocaine every day. Like, it's just bad for you, you know? But if you're an adult and, you want to have fun every once in a while, then no one can really stop you except like police. But
And
don't be stupid enough to get caught, I guess.
that actually is part of what I was wondering is do you think it should be illegal?
Drugs.
Yeah.
It's a fine balance. I mean, like, I think that the positive part of drugs being illegal is that uh, it allows people who pump drugs into communities that are vulnerable, like poverty-ridden communities that are more susceptible to seeking those like fleeting pleasures, like let's say heroin, that those people can be indicted for their abuse of that community, as well as their use of that community's weakness against itself for monetary gain. So I think in that way, um, keeping them illegal allows bad people to be held accountable. On the other hand, um, I'm a firm believer that like adults can do what they want, and adults should be able to weigh out the ramifications of their decisions. And like, yeah, drugs are fun. I've done a few. I've had a good time for the most part. Um, but I've always kept in mind that if I continued it over and over and over and over, I would wither away physically and mentally. And I
Mm.
didn't want that for myself. So I always kept it under wraps. So I have a mixed view on it, like I do with most things. But yeah, I have a mixed view on it. What about you?
Personally, see now I psychedelics for me have helped me insanely. They brought me out of a very deep depression and suicidal ideation that I was stuck in
So
for a
cool.
long time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so they were really useful. So I might be biased in a lot of ways.
That's
But
okay. That's cool. I'm
the
glad.
the thing with
I don't even think you have to necessarily think drugs are good to support legalization, because this is the thing without while they're illegal, they can't be regulated, and people are gonna buy drugs. I've never offered someone drugs, and they've said no, they're illegal. The only reason they've said no is because they're scared to do them, or it's just not for them. And you're like, you respect that, but no one's ever said no, they're illegal. No one's ever said that, and so people don't care if the drugs are legal or illegal. Most people, at least, do not care. And so while they're illegal and they can't be regulated, anyone can put anything in those drugs, and the people taking them are a way greater risk, because most people do not use a test kit to test that their drugs are pure, and even if they do, it doesn't always work well. And so right now in America, there's the opioid epidemic, and a lot of people are buying heroin that's actually got like a lot of research chemicals in it, and like fentanyl, carfentanil, and this is causing people to overdose, and it's causing a lot of people to die. However, if the drugs were legalized, then they could be regulated, and then as well as that, if people are buying, let's say someone's buying a lot of heroin with their card, we can be like, are you good? Do you need rehab? Like, do you need help? And we can find those people. It destigmatizes addiction, so addicts can get help easier. And then, as again, it makes the drug safer, both for the people that are abusing it and also for the people that just want to have a good time. Alcohol, I don't mind. I like alcohol, and I think it should be legal. But alcohol is, in terms of being dangerous, one of the more dangerous drugs out there, and we have that everywhere. And I don't have a problem with that, but I think it's incredibly hypocritical of society to say we can drink alcohol, but mushrooms, LSD, Oxycontin, no, you can't. You're not allowed those ones. And I think it gets a lot of people, innocent people, put in jail because they're just using, or they're addicted and they can't get off it. And so I think legalization does much good. And the only reason it was originally enforced is because during the counterculture era of the 1960s, a lot of people were taking psychedelics and cannabis, and back then they actually had the studies that showed that LSD could help in curing depression. They knew it was one of the a really promising treatment for depression, but because all the people that were part of the counterculture movement were taking these chemicals, and because it was so easy for the government to plant these drugs on people, because it's easy to plant drugs on someone, they made them illegal, and then they could arrest the people who were taking these drugs, and the main people taking them were the people who were against the war, who didn't want the war being fought. And so
Absolutely.
it was introduced for a completely corrupt authoritarian reason, and I think that alone, plus the amount of overdoses, goes to show that making them illegal does hardly any good. That's my take on
Wow,
it.
that is such a compassionate and logical view on the topic. I'm really impressed by the way that you articulated that, and that's just really cool. I've never thought about it from that perspective, but I would love if you sent me some resources to do more research just in our private DMs, because that's really cool. I've never thought about it. And I actually completely agree with everything that you said. It's difficult to have this conversation without addressing the prison industrial complex and how it's basically like a modern slave labor.
Sadly, the rest of this question was unintelligible and unfixable. So we just moved on to the next question, which is really sad because I did want to hear her full answer on this, but it's fine. The rest of the interview is just as interesting.
Okay, so if I remember correctly from one of your videos, you said you were Christian or Catholic.
I am Christian,
Okay.
yes.
How did you justify your religious beliefs as a Christian with being trans? Because obviously there's a common situation where a lot of Christian believers will be against trans people or just the LGBT generally. And so how did you justify having both of those things?
Well, a few things combined. I mean, first and foremost, despite what so many modern day kind of like, Anglo-Saxon Christians would, believe. I've always subscribed to the school of thought that says the Bible is more of like an allegory and um, a kind of like set of guidelines that use metaphor, parable, um, poem, song, fantasy, all of those things to kind of less like uh, recount historical events or like scientific truths, and more so to give insight on like the themes of a human life. And the ramifications of certain decisions and the benefits of other decisions and the benefits of certain mindsets and ways of being, and of course all of those things kind of orbit around the existence of like the Christian God, which is something that I believe in, um, as well as the historical impact of Jesus Christ, which is another religious figure that I do believe in. I think the Bible is one of the most beautiful books ever written. Um, and I am able to interact with the Bible in a positive way as a transgender person, because it is not a historical recount, but more so I would use to describe like the genre, like we kind of covered at the very beginning of this discussion. I don't even refer to like my trans womanhood as like my gender identity. To me, it is just like the diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and my transition is the outcome of that. So if the gates of heaven are closed off to me for seeking an effective treatment for a debilitating mental disorder, then I guess it's also closed off to diabetics are inheriting God's kingdom. So I feel pretty secure in the fact that I have an extremely positive relationship with the Holy Spirit, and I stand very firmly in that. I do get some lashback from like the Christian community, but I have pretty thick skin when it comes to that.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm not personally Christian. I did grow up in a Catholic household, but I'm not personally religious. I'm not atheist either. I'm agnostic. But I agree with you on the idea that the Bible, or just holy texts in general, in my opinion, they are, they're metaphors, they're stories. They try and depict a certain message and a certain guidelines to live by. I definitely agree with that, and I do think the Bible is a really interesting book, even if I don't believe it in a literal sense. It's a very interesting book.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I'm extremely inspired by the Bible. I read my Bible every single day. I pray every single day. I set aside time to spend. Definitely like holy text in general is better digest poetry. You know what I mean? Poetry and things. So when it becomes like empirical, when spiritual things become empirical, that is, I mean, that's basically a blurred division between church and state, because the state is empirical, but the church is, spiritual. So laws enforced by man, I always tell people, if they are like inheriting, the kingdom of heaven or anything like that, I'm like, we'll see. We will see. If it's real and you end up going, then we will see if I'm there or not. And until then, sit back, read your Bible just like I do, pray to God just like I do, and focus more on your relationship with Jesus Christ than mine, because that's, how I handle Christianity. Is it's more individualized.
Yeah. So I have a friend who is very into. Now, I don't want to offend with this idea, because I know a lot of Christians get offended by this idea, And so I'm not. I will shut the question down instantly if it is not something you want to entertain.
It's okay.
Uh,
It's okay.
so my friend is of the idea that everyone is God, and Jesus knew this, and that's all Jesus was trying to portray, was that he is the Son of God, and everyone is Jesus. He thinks that Jesus was kind of like a prophet that was kind of trying to show off, like, you are me. He thinks everyone is basically God. I don't know what other way to put it, but he doesn't think God is a higher entity. He thinks everything is God, so, and not separate. So you are God, I am God, this desk is God. It's all God. What is
Yeah,
your interpretation of that?
I am not in total disagreement with your friend. I don't find that offensive at all. I think that God is in everything. I think that everything is in God. There is so much contextual evidence within the Bible and within Jesus's written teachings that that is in fact what he promoted. I uh, uh, the interesting thing about the Bible is that it can be interpreted in so many ways, and everyone thinks that they're interpreting it the right way. And it has also been retranslated more times than you could count on 20 hands together. So, it's a tough one, but I think that God is within all of us. And if you're a subscriber to the belief in God, then it would make sense that God is everywhere, all the time, never ending. You should look into egg theory,
I think
and it
I've
might.
watched Kurska's art video on it.
I love that channel so much. That's one of my favorite channels, and I watched the same video. That concept, that there is no division between like you and I, or
Yeah.
us and any other human being. We are all like one soul having each individual experience, and once we have had uh, every human experience possible, once I have had every human experience possible, or you, or this one soul that we all share, then we ascend into godhood, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, going back to the idea with the whole thing of psychedelics and religion are in a lot of ways very tied and have been through history. And a common experience on psychedelics, which I find really interesting, and it's an experience I've had as well, is talking about the idea of separation not being actually what is true. That it's a common experience on psychedelics during, especially during intense ego deaths, for the boundaries of you and everything else to dissolve, and what that can commonly be, what can commonly accompany that is at least the perceived experience that the person has became God, in a sense, that the person has become everything, everyone, all of it, and that they are God. And so I find it really interesting that psychedelics can give that experience, even to someone who's never read that idea before.
Absolutely. And I would take that concept that you just and an experience that I've had as well on psychedelics, like the dissolving of the borders between like the self and everything else. And you can take it even a step further when you look into like the Kabbalah and Kabbalism, which has its roots in like Judaism. And they kind of believe the further you get into their teachings, which are very Christian, that the intention of a follower of God is to be God-like, right? I think that most Christians can agree with this. And the Kabbalist belief is that there is nothing that we can give to God because God is all, and God is like ever giving, right? So
Yeah.
there's no gift. Like tithing is just like a symbol. Um, you know, uh, uh, all of these kind of like rites and rituals are just like symbols that serve humans more than they do God, because God is everything. But in order to be God-like, according to them, is charity. Charity is like at the root of every 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 time an angel is present in a room, every time God is present in a room, they are present in a moment of good deeds and doing kind things for other people for no reason, expecting nothing in return, just pure charity. They kind of believe that that is like an angelic force, and that God is not this unreachable, like higher entity that on this topic is like separate from you. God is more so the inherent, like energetic force of charity, which I think is just like a really beautiful thought.
That is a really beautiful thought. That's a very interesting thought too. I'll have to look into that. Have you ever looked into not the Kabbalah, but the Kybalion?
I have not. What is that?
Okay, so have you heard of Hermeticism?
Yeah,
It's
like the old Hermetic order and things like that. That's
yeah.
really cool you mentioned that.
So, the Kybalion is a book by the Three Initiates, and it goes into the principles of Hermeticism. And it's a really old book, and it's really, really interesting and really, really trippy. And it's something that I found very intriguing when I listened to it, because I listened to the
Is
audio
it
book.
connected to the Rosicrucian order at all?
I'm not sure. I think it was
Interesting.
connected
Sorry,
to
keep
the
going.
Order of the Golden Dawn or something. I think. I might be
Yeah.
getting it
Oh,
wrong.
that's so interesting. Yeah, I grew up on all that stuff. This is like the core of like my dad's spiritual beliefs. This stuff that we're talking about right now.
The Kybalion is a really interesting book, and the thing that was really interesting about it is that after I had my really intense what I call my God trip on acid, where I became God, I saw a lot of things and I came to a lot of realizations. And as I was listening to this book after this trip, I had never read it beforehand. I didn't even know what Hermeticism was. I was telling my friend about the trip and the realizations I came to, and he said it aligned well, like almost like exactly with Hermeticism. So I listened to the book, and it was like it was reading my own thoughts to me. It was insane. I find that really
Wow,
interesting.
that's so cool.
That this information seems to be stored in us somewhere.
Absolutely. Wow, that's a really good way to put it too. Like it's stored within you, and it's only once you kind of read it and look into it that it kind of unlocks.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I would love it if you sent me a link to that book,
I will
because not
definitely
only
send you a
myself,
link.
but I know multiple people who would like that content.
I'll definitely send you a link. Yeah, it is a really interesting idea that a lot of stuff's already stored, because I remember on my God trip when I was going through this tunnel for a while of it, and as I was going through this tunnel, the tunnel was like a library of infinite knowledge, and I could ask any question I want, and I'd get the answer to it no matter what it was. And it's just really insane. It's your mind, I swear, it has like a lot in it, and you just don't know it.
You access the Akashic records.
But I've heard of it. I don't know what it is, but potentially.
So funny.
Psychedelics and religion are insane. The spirituality as well, I should say, because religion and spirituality can sometimes be disconnected in a sense.
It definitely is. That's so cool. Interesting.
Yeah. So back onto the controversial stuff. So, what is your take on the whole situation of child transitioners? So just so you don't have to repeat all that, because I could gather a good amount of it. Go check out her video on her channel about child transitioners. I'll link it in the description for a more nuanced response, but carry on from there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a quick summary is that I am well aware of the benefits of transition for some young people. I think that there is like a rather strenuous process that we can use to verify if it is, but no matter if the child will benefit from it in terms of like the alleviation of dysphoria or not, a lot of people do not want to talk about the negative side effects of puberty blockers. And look, there are negative side effects of antidepressants. There are negative side effects of uh, ADHD medications, insulin, anything that is pharmaceutical has its side effects. So I'm not saying that the negative side effects are a reason that they should be banned, puberty blockers, I mean, but I think that we should be aware of them, most specifically the parents of the children who are being given access to transition. I think that they should be brutally aware of some of these side effects, some of which can be non reversible sexual dysfunction, so the inability to have an orgasm, the inability to become aroused, major lack in bone density, which can cause anything ranging from bone fractures from small impacts all the way to like tooth decay. I mean, it's pretty serious. So, I like with everything else, I always say it, but like with everything else, I have a pretty nuanced view of it. I can see the good and the bad that comes with it. I think usually it's a little better to wait until someone's like an adult because, I mean, I know if we're just looking at in terms of like the efficacy of hormones, I know people who started transition at like 25 and like 3 years in are like unclockable. You really don't have to start at like 9 years old or like 15 years old to get good results from transition. There are people who start in like, their 30s and end up being like beautiful women or very handsome men. So, it just, doesn't, you don't have to start as a child to receive like efficient results from medical transition. But I mean, if it happens, fingers crossed that it's good for the child. If there was a vote on it, I would vote in favor of like a strenuous empirical process to verify. But I would not vote for an strenuous process that ensures the patient and the parents are made extremely aware of the side effects, of which there are many.
I'd agree. I'm not against it entirely, but what I think there needs to be a more rigorous a bit like way to test to make sure that this is in a majority of cases that you never give the blockers or the hormones to a child that definitely is not trans or a child that does not have dysphoria. I think it's really important that the testing is rigorous to ensure.
Absolutely.
Because they can ruin people's lives.
Absolutely. And it does. It does. I mean, I spend one thing that motivated me to start my channel, and I'm about to film a Q&A after this for my channel personally. And I'll cover this question or a question about why I started my channel in that video. But one of the reasons that I decided to start my channel is I started joining detransitioner spaces online, like detransitioner forums, of which there are tens of thousands of people. People always want to act like detransitioners are this small number, and they're not. That's a lie. But I started joining these spaces and just kind of seeing like, oh my God, like this really happens to people. Like this crazy stuff really happens, You hear stories about people who have gone in to get like a neo vagina after like a vaginoplasty, and they'll recount things like, you could stab my vagina and I would not feel it. You could literally insert a knife into my vagina and I would not feel it, because that's how like numb the area is. Now, of course, when I say that, it kind of adds fuel to the fire of like the far right, and that is not my intention, because there are a vast majority of cases where a procedure like a vaginoplasty is efficient and productive, and the result that you walk away with is a functional, healthy surgical, like anatomically correct vagina.
Yeah.
But that is not always the case, and the left and the trans community loves to act as if the things where it goes horrendously wrong is not the case, and they ice out the detransitioner community and the community of people who have basically gone through like the horrible things that you can potentially go through if you choose to transition as an adult, which is when you should. So, yeah, I totally agree. I'm in the same boat.
Why do you think that it seems like, at least online, that there's way more female to male detransitioners than male to female detransitioners? Why do you think that seems to be the trend?
Ooh, let's get into this one. So, first of all, historically speaking, the empirical diagnosis history of gender dysphoria has been primarily in male to female patients. Up until very, very recently, have we ever seen like a majority of female to male people within the trans community? It's always been uncommon. Trans people in general have been uncommon, but within those small numbers, the majority were male to female. And there's lots of different studies, like old school medical studies, to provide insight on why that is. And a lot of them are pretty accurate. But what we're seeing now is an influx of young biologically female people identifying as some form of transmasculine. And there's a few things that go into that. So first and foremost, what we know about biological females, and what I know, having been on estrogen for so long, and the chemistry of my brain just functioning more female, the way that women connect with one another is by mirroring each other's emotions and mirroring each other's experiences. While men tend to take a more individualistic route with the way that they connect with people, women are very reflective of one another. And studies have been shown, even within Harvard University, a study was done where if there's a group of young men and one of them insinuates that they have gender dysphoria, over the course of time, it will remain just the one. The other men in that group will not reflect the one man who is showing signs of gender dysphoria and expressing the pain of it. However, in groups of women or biological women, they do reflect each other. And if one person comes in and starts opening up about her feelings of gender dysphoria and what that's doing for her, naturally, in order to connect with that individual, the other women in the group will begin mirroring that behavior as a way of comforting her, right? As a way of affirming the pain that she is going through experiencing gender dysphoria. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah, and we can observe it in so many ways. I mean, pro anorexia spaces online, which I have unfortunately been a part of. Pro anorexia spaces online, which I've unfortunately been a part of, are almost entirely populated by women. Men do not support each other. Men do not copy each other's mental health, right? Mm-hmm. Women do, however. So when one woman is anorexic, another anorexic woman will enter her life, and they will affirm each other back and forth, and do things like, God, I hate the term trigger warning, but having gone through anorexia myself, I mean, I'll just say trigger warning. Do things like encourage each other to count calories, and say, like, there was this one person I knew in like a pro ana space, and you would like post like what you had eaten that day, and she would like comment on your picture, be like, I know you did not just eat that, Bella Hadid. And so anyways, I'm kind of rambling, I'm sorry, but yeah, women mirror other women, and so that's why we're seeing this influx of female to male trans people kind of just like coming out in groups. You're seeing couples otherwise lesbian couples transition together. You're seeing sexual where the biological female in the relationship will come out, male counterpart will not subsequently come out as a trans woman, but that cannot be said the other way around. Oftentimes in a and this is anecdotal evidence, it's just what I've seen online, in a otherwise heterosexual dynamic, if the biological male comes out as a trans woman, the biological female as a trans. So it is a social contagiological women. And this is not to be disrespectful to anyone who genuinely does have like signs of gender dysphoria. It is just influx of young women making the rash choice to take testosterone, which is much less reversible than estrogen, and later on detransitioning out of regret. Again, a lot of this can be covered in my Can Children Take Responsibility video. I talk about this a lot. So
yeah, that's really fucking interesting. I've never heard about that before. Because I've noticed there's a lot more female to male detransitions, but that's a really interesting theory as to why it seems to be happening. Okay.
I could go on for longer. I mean, there is just like there's so much information about like, you know, young autistic women who have a hard time fitting in like, you know, social circles, but end up finding themselves in like Tumblr rabbit holes, Twitter rabbit holes, where all of a sudden they're facing like their first experience with true group acceptance, but on the condition that they, you know, identify as something other than just like a boring cis heterosexual white girl who's not meeting the beauty is not a part of any group that gains them accolades in these like socialist online spaces, and thus being so lonely, impressionable, in a large number autistic, as well as just having horrendous body issues and having those body issues reaffirmed by these trans spaces online, falling down the rabbit hole of taking testosterone and getting top surgery. I mean, there's so much that goes into it, but you know,
so
go watch my video on Detransitioners and you'll see what I think.
Yeah, her channel will be linked in the description below. So I need to go in like 5-10 minutes because my food has just arrived.
Me too.
So yeah. Final question, if you had to describe dysphoria to someone who's never experienced it, how would you describe it?
I would describe it as pain first and foremost, but like a numb, constant pain that you are only aware of once you become aware of it. But once you become aware of it, a lot of decisions start making sense. Like for me personally, I used to have a lot of just like promiscuous, unprotected sex with people that I barely knew. I abused drugs. I self-isolated. I just made a lot of choices pre-transition that were very much indicative of someone who had absolutely no respect for the health and well-being of her physical body. And that was primarily because I felt extremely disconnected from my physical body and felt that it was unimportant on all levels to keep that body safe and to keep that body healthy. Post-transition, realizing that I had gender dysphoria, realizing that there was that disconnect between my mind, body, and soul, and then taking the medical steps to further align those things, I now am extremely protective of my body. I'm extremely protective of my physical health. And so if I were to describe dysphoria, I would say that in my experience, it was a complete disregard and lack of concern for my own physical safety until I realized that my body was worth loving post transition. I hope that's a good answer.
Yeah, that's a good answer. That's I appreciate you giving that information because that is a very personal response. So I appreciate that.
First, thank you.
But yeah, I think this is a good place to end this off. Thank you for having this conversation.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I had an amazing time.
Saying this was a really interesting conversation. Maybe something like this could happen again in the future if it seems like something that is doable. And
Yeah,
you'd be
I
down.
would love that. Maybe we
Yeah,
can collaborate for my channel sometime.
yeah, that'd be great. So is there
Well,
anything you want to say before we end it off?
before we end it off, I just want to say again, thank you so much for having me on your channel. I love your videos, and
Thank you.
you really took of course, yeah, you really took the interview in a direction that I was so like just intrigued by and did not expect, and yeah, you really used the element of surprise to keep it really interesting. So I appreciate that a lot. I think you're an excellent moderator, an interviewer, and yeah, I'm very much looking forward to working together in the future because I think that we align a lot in terms of our like philosophical and political views. So not just as a colleague here on YouTube, but also just as like a potential friend. I'm very glad that we got to do this today, and I appreciate you giving me the time.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I appreciate that. We'll definitely have to continue conversations off camera, whether that's on Instagram or in Discord, just throughout, because this has been a really good conversation, even if I'm not recording. Just these conversations, just, it was fun. Maybe a less structured one if it wasn't recorded. Not me just sitting there, or you sitting there just asking questions, but yeah. Yeah, it's been a really good conversation. Thank you for coming on. I have food, so I need to go before it gets cold, but I'll see you in
All
a bit.
right, no worries. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you
too.
so much.
Thank you too. Okay, well, that was an interview with Ona Jordyn. If you want to check her out, her stuff is in the description. Go check her out. Her videos, so they're pretty long, some of them, but they're pretty good. They go pretty in depth. She talks about her views more in detail on there, and just overall, great channel. But other than that, I am done. I will see you in a different video. Goodbye.